I apologize once again for putting you in this strange position, but I do want to show you some stuff. In my younger days, like 4 months ago, I used to show on a piece of paper, but it's actually much better to show on the screen, and then we can look at it together rather than putting it down to class. Okay, so I was going to say something, but I've forgotten what it is. So, to introduce myself to Amelia, my name is Rabbi Rubenstein, and I'm here to talk about Holocaust. And last week we did an overview over, where is Sarah Funnel?
Somewhere.
Okay. As I said, it's very dangerous if I get to know your name. Okay.
Oh
gosh. So basically,
I wanted to catch where you're saying something important.
Okay. So last week she's giving up. Last week we spoke about like a conceptual historical overview of the Holocaust, and today I want to do something different. I want to do what I really want to do, and that is to go into the kishkas of the Holocaust and to talk about how people responded and how people reacted, and to try, as much as it's impossible for us to really understand how people will react to what was happening, but to try and do this. So the session is entitled "The Man of Faith Faces the Challenge of the Shoah, Faces the Challenge of the Holocaust," and we're mainly going to be talking about people who are, let's see if I can do this fluently, we're mainly going to be talking about people who are in ghettos. So I want to start off by talking about moving to the ghetto, just to give the context. Okay, we didn't speak about ghettos very much last week. Why do you think the Germans put Jews in ghettos? What was the point? Anybody?
To like isolate them.
In order to?
Well, one, I think it's in order to do whatever they wanted to them. It also isolates them from, it almost makes them pariahs to the outsiders.
Okay. As we said, anybody have anything else to say about why Germans put Jews into ghettos? Yeah.
I just think because if they had to move out of their homes, then they could easily like start moving Germans into their homes and kind of replacing where they were and human beings and kind of just.
Okay, it was definitely part of it. But I think we saw last week that the Germans weren't clear as to what they were going to do. Right? They made it up as they went along. But it was useful to disorient Jews to, when you move somebody forcibly out of their home, especially if you move them to a yucky area of town and you move them to a place where they have to really live. I mean, I think I may have told you there was in Krakow, different from place to place, but in Krakow, in an area where 3,000 people had lived before the war, 20,000 Jews were crowded into a ghetto. So people are really crowded. We'll talk about that in a second. But you just combobulate people if you move them. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they're available under your control for what you may think you want to do. And number three, name again?
Genie.
And the third thing that Jeannie said, I think, is most important, is you basically break the normal connections between the Jews and their neighbors. Okay? Because, what's her name? Belle. So Belle is my neighbor. Okay, she's Jewish, I'm not.
You're matching.
Okay. Okay. She's Jewish, I'm not. When my baby, I just put my baby to sleep and I have to run outside for something, I said to Belle, I'm leaving my front door open, the baby shouldn't wake up, just keep, I borrow food from Belle, she doesn't borrow food from me because I'm a Pole and I don't keep kosher. Okay? Now, you can't tell me that Belle is a rodent. Okay? You can't tell me. You can't tell me that she's a subspecies. Okay? Because I know her. She's my neighbor. We've lived together for 100 years. I know her parents, or whatever the case happens to be. But if you break down the normal social connections between the Jews and the non-Jews, and you stick the Jews into a ghetto behind a wall or behind a fence or whatever happens to be, then it becomes much easier to say those are rodents. And it's interesting that around the Warsaw ghetto, it didn't say danger, Jewish area, it said danger, disease. Okay, yes.
I think it's so fascinating because like it's these ideas of like animals in like cages, right? Like they was like put people in like a secluded like space as if it's like the cage. Like you put like a
right.
animal in a cage.
And there's a lot of stuff about how the Poles were on the. There was a merry-go-round, not a merry-go-round, a Ferris wheel. There was a Ferris wheel. There was like a play park outside the ghetto. and the Poles would be sort of riding on the Ferris wheel while
So
the Jews would be
true.
killed in the ghetto. And in fact, there's quite a bit of Polish literature about how bad some of the Poles felt in the 50s and 60s about that happening. But anyhow, they moved Jews into ghettos. So let's think about moving into a ghetto. Thing number one, okay? It differed from place to place. Oh, sorry, thing number one. When the Jews were moving into the ghetto, that's when they began to realize that this story would probably end differently. What do I mean by that? All Jews living in the Eastern Europe, whether it was Poland or Belarus or Ukraine or Lithuania, they all had stories from their grandparents and great-grandparents of periods of time when the non-Jews went crazy, of periods of time when they were pogroming. And normally what a Jew did, you sort of put your head down, you minded your own business, you kept the windows shut and so on and so forth. And after a couple of days or weeks, it passed. Very rarely was somebody killed in a pogrom in those times. There was a pogrom in Chisinau just at the turn of the century, and it really sent shockwaves throughout the Jewish world and the general world because a lot of people were killed. And that was really unusual and marked a change. So when this stuff started happening, they thought, well, these things have happened before. Survivors tell us that when Jews were told that they had to move into a ghetto, they realized that this story was probably going to end differently, that this hadn't happened before. I know there were ghettos in Italy. There was a ghetto in Rome. There was a ghetto in Venice, but it was a different type of ghetto. It wasn't a ghetto where Jews were forcibly moved to and put in terrible conditions. It was a Jewish area that was locked up at night, so that the Jews wouldn't prowl the streets and rob people, whatever Jews do. Okay, but this type of ghetto was new. So the first thing about it is this marked a turning point for the Jews of Poland. They realized it looks like this story is going to end differently. But they still didn't give up hope, One of the saddest things I've ever seen in the death camp of Belzec, which is a little known death camp in the south of Poland where about 600,000 Jews were killed like in 10 months. But in the death camp of Belzec, there's a display there of a display cabinet of front door keys. Jews who were being sent to the death camp locked their front door, put their key in their pocket, like I did when I left home earlier this morning, whenever I left home, okay? And they didn't think they were going to get back there, but they didn't have complete despair yet. And they took their front door keys with them. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, I'm being sent to a ghetto, maybe for the rest of my life, maybe I'll never be home again. What do I take with me? And I'm going to just say it because I want to do it a little faster to get to the main stuff. So I'm going to take warm clothes. It's freezing in Poland. I'm going to take food. I'm going to take valuables. Why would I want valuables? To buy food or to pay to bribe somebody? Let's think a second. We have grandfathers, Zayda's, a great grandfather's Kiddush cup. It's a battered silver Kiddush cup. It's so tarnished that nobody drinks wine from it anymore, because if you drink wine from it, the taste is absolutely terrible. We only use it once a year. When do we use it? For what? It's an incredible thing, by the way, that I made up the story like about 20 years ago to illustrate the point, and people always get it. People always tell me Eliyahu Navi at Pesach, because we all know that Eliyahu Navi is not the quality of the wine that he drinks, especially after having drunk wine of 3,000 sailors or 30,000. Moving along. Am I going to take it with? It's been in the family for 5 generations, but it has no commercial value whatsoever. Family photos. I'm allowed to take 23 kilos, like on a plane. I could fill up those 23 kilos with ease with family photos. This is a pre-digitalized era. What family photos am I going to take? Many Holocaust survivors say, I don't know what my grandparents looked like if they were young kids, because there were no photos. My mom came to South Africa in 1936 before the war, and letters flew backwards and forwards between Lithuania and South Africa. And there were photos and wedding invitations. And from when I was Johan, I somehow sussed that those photos, I just don't want to go.
No, I don't want to go.
That those photos were very, very precious, because I used to steal them from the albums and I ferret them away places. Even today, I sometimes open the book and I find a whole bunch of photos that I'd stolen when I was a kid. Because I knew that those photos of my grandparents and my uncles and aunts from Lithuania were the most valuable things in our house from our perspective. So let's say we know what we're going to take with us, and we go to the
Ignore me. I lost something actually.
what did you do?
I lost my belt. But just continue. Okay, just continue. Thanks, guys. Sorry.
Okay, I don't believe that she's not going to come back. But moving along, we now know where we're going. We go to the Jewish council. The Germans set up a Jewish council in every ghetto to manage the inner workings of the ghetto. And I say, Rubenstein, Yitzhak, and they say, yes, we've allocated an apartment for you. They give you the street, the name, the form, the apartment. And I turn around to my wife, like any good Jewish husband would do at that moment. And I say to her, you see, it's not so bad. We have a reservation. They're expecting us. I think everybody knows that loopy feeling in your stomach when you arrive at a hotel and you have a reservation and the clerk says to you, Rubenstein, and you think, oh my God, here we go. You know, we have a reservation. And I go around to the apartment. And as I get to the door of the apartment, I realize something is wrong. Because I got the apartment in my pocket. I got it from the Jewish council. And yet the door is open and there's another family there. And I run back to the Jewish council. There must be some mistake. No, there's no mistake. It's a 4-roomed Polish apartment with a tiny kitchen. And you're lucky that there's an indoor toilet if the toilet isn't in the yard. There's one family there already. You're the second family. I've sent 2 other families there already. And you better make sure that you go there fast because otherwise, your wife and children won't get a decent room. And we find ourselves sharing a 4-room little apartment with 3 other families that might not have my same religious values or cultural values or whatever values or whatever. I certainly don't leave any food in the kitchen because it'll disappear. And just think about this. I now spend a couple of years sharing a room with my wife and 6 children. And just say, not to make too much of a point of it, one night, my wife and I feel like a moment of marital intimacy behind the curtain with all our children on the other side. Is that appropriate? How does life continue? And then people are starving. I'll just give you one example, or 2 examples. I had a congregant in my synagogue in Johannesburg, and in Cape Town. I had a congregant in my synagogue in Johannesburg, and she was a Holocaust survivor. And she told me once, you know what it is to starve? When you're starving, your stomach is digesting, but there ain't anything in your stomach to digest. Your stomach is basically digesting itself. She told me that it's the most terrible pain you can possibly imagine. Another person, I was once in Auschwitz with a group, and there was a survivor in the group, the non-Jewish Auschwitz guide, the Polish Auschwitz guide, was trying to explain what it means to starve. And this survivor said, I'll tell you what it is to starve. He said, I was in Auschwitz with my father. We shared a shelf together in one of the barracks. One night I was holding my father, and at that moment he died. And at the moment that he died, I cried. Gone. What are you going to do? But then he continued, you know why I cried? Because at the moment that my father died, he was holding a crust of bread in his hand. And another prisoner managed to grab that crust of bread from him before I had a chance to. His father dies, he sobs because he lost the crust of bread. This man survived the Holocaust and has to remember for the rest of his life what happened at the moment that his father died. It's a miracle, people are saying. Mm-hmm. So we've got terrible conditions, starvation, and that's people living in the ghetto. In the Warsaw Ghetto, for example, 150,000 people died in about 18 months of starvation, of freezing to death, and of disease. And the Germans pathologically and compulsively took pictures and videos of what was happening as if to say to the world, you see, we told you Jews are vermin. We told you that they're rats, that they're rodents. We put them in their own place and look what's become of them. You know, as if that was what caused it. Let's move on. So the first thing I want, with this background in mind, the man of faith deals with stuff. So I'm going to just jump ahead. I'll go backwards. How do I go backwards? Backwards and backwards. Okay. I want to develop a couple of pieces here. First piece, about Jewish identity. So the document that you see over here is a particular Jew who reaffirms his Jewish identity. He had converted to Christianity. He arrives in the Lodz Ghetto. Most of my documents are from the Lodz Ghetto because the rabbis of the Lodz Ghetto had a rabbinical council there, and they documented everything, and they kept copies of all their letters, and we found the whole treasure trove of the copies of all the letters that they wrote during the time of the Holocaust. So there are a lot of letters from them that you go to see. In this document over here, this guy basically stands before the rabbis and reaffirms his Jewish identity, even though he converted to Christianity. Does he have to? He doesn't have to. On Yom HaShoah, we'll talk about whether you have to or not. We've got time to get there. Okay? But I want to tell you another piece about Jewish identity. I have a colleague he knows everything about the Holocaust. I know a bit, especially about religious reactions and observance during the Holocaust. But he has a bit of a strange idea. He basically believes that it's a good thing to go into ruins in Poland and take your groups into the ruins. I think that's such a good idea because I like my grandchildren to be able to see it one year, and the more people traipsing about in ruins, the less likely they're going to last. So he took people into ruins of the very first death camp to be functioning, the death camp of Chelmno. And one of the boys, I think I told you last week, they used vans there, gas vans there, okay? It was just a place where they were robbed, stripped, shorn of their hair all over their bodies, and they were put into the gas vans. The gas vans drove down to the valley about 9 or 13 minutes, and by the time they got there, they were done to death. So they were in the basement of the ruined basement of the house where they were processed, so to speak, if I use that language. And this one ADD boy is bopping on a stone step. There was like a staircase that went down to a sub-basement. And as he's bopping on the stone step, the stone collapses underneath him. And his first reaction was, oh my God, I destroyed the death camp. And then he looked to see what was lying underneath the stone. The first thing he saw was a little skeleton, yo big. Okay? And the second thing he saw was this knife. It looks like a pen knife. What's written on the hasp of the pen knife? Shabbat Kodesh. Now, my family, when I grew up, my family was a traditional family, okay, not a full family. So my parents would never dream of not going to shul on Friday night, but they drove. And we had a Shabbos meal, and then after the Shabbos meal, there was no television in South Africa in those days, but after the Shabbos meal, the radio was put on and we sat in the lounge and listened to a radio show, whatever the case is. But at the Shabbos meal, before you benched, you took the knives off the table. Because a table is a mizbeach and a knife is a symbol of, it's a next week's parasha. This coming week's parasha, after the 10 Commandments. The knife, it says you shouldn't build the mizbeach of metal because the metal is a sign of aggression. And the mizbeach is peace, and the Shabbos table is peace, and the knife is aggression. So you take the knife off the table. So we drove on Shabbos, and we listened to the radio after the Shabbos meal, but we had to take the knives off the table before benching. That's your traditional family. There's no balance in terms of what they do, but it's very precious. Yeah, you don't have to worry about that. Because you have your knife on the table, saying Shabbos Kodesh, and when the end comes to the meal, you go, click, you stick the blade inside, and hey, presto, you've got no blade on the table, and you can bench. I was giving this talk at a retirement facility, let's call it that, rather than an old age home, in Beit Vegan a couple of weeks ago. My sister lives there. And after I finished speaking, some people had questions and so on, about 20 minutes later, this woman comes down and she shows me she has a knife like that she had got from her father. And it was very common in the 20s and 30s to have knives like this. On the blade of the knife, this is the actual knife that they found. On the blade of the knife, there were brown stains. They called a Polish pathologist who knew nothing about Jewish customs, and you'll see why I'm emphasizing that in a moment. And he basically said two things. Firstly, the skeleton was that of a little child about a week old, and the stain on the blade of the knife was blood. Are you putting the story together? So we put the following story together. There was a woman from Lodz, from one of the villages around Chelmno. She's been sent to Chelmno. She brings the Shabbos knife with her. She has no illusions whatsoever that she's going to have a Shabbos table and cut challah. She says to herself, she's had a baby. She says to herself, because it's all rumors, nothing was shown. If the rumors are correct, and if this is my baby and mine last journey, and we're going to be killed, before I return my baby to Hashem, I'm going to give my baby a Brit Milah. And by the way, that's the halakha, if Khalila, a million times. A baby is still born, or a baby dies before the time of the Brit Milah, you give the baby a Brit Milah before burying the baby. Why did we come to that conclusion? Because there's another story. When Auschwitz once, a woman was walking down that final path on the way to the gas chambers, and she's holding a bundle in her hand. And she sees a Jewish laborer there with the striped pajama type uniform and so on. And she says to him, "Excuse me, sir." She was Hungarian because it was the time of Hungarian Jews. I'm not sure what she would have spoken to him, what language she would have spoken to him if he was Polish, but because Hungarian Jews didn't speak Yiddish. But let's move on. She manages to say to him, "Do you have a knife?" And he says, "Shh," because he's been there long enough to know that he's not allowed to talk to them. And talking could mean either of them being shot immediately. But it's too late. A Nazi officer has heard them, and the Nazi officer takes out a knife and gives it to her. What was he thinking? Who knows? She takes the knife, she undoes the bundle, and you see a little baby boy, tiny baby boy. And she says, "Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al hamilah," and she gives her baby boy a brit milah 2 inches away from their death in the gas chambers. And I think about these children and I think, they don't understand. I forgot to tell you that we found a letter that was written by the rabbis of Lodz to a doctor by the name of Dr. Shmuel Weiss. And they say to him, a baby was born to a family, they give the names of the family. If you can't find the baby at the family's address, maybe the baby's at the wife's parents' address. The wife claims that the baby is not well enough to have a Brit Milah. The baby was born a year ago. So the wife is putting off, the mother is putting off the Brit Milah. Why is she putting off the Brit Milah? Let's assume the baby isn't sick. Why is she putting off the Brit Milah?
She doesn't want her baby to be easily identified.
Most people who managed to pass as non-Jews were girls who were blue-eyed with blondish type of hair, who could masquerade as a Pole or as an Aryan. A boy, it's a 1/2 second inspection and you're sunk. So she thinks to herself, if by some miracle my baby manages to escape or to get out the ghetto, let me give him an edge. Do we understand her? Of course we do. And then you have this other woman. And I have no understanding of these other women. Because these other women, basically, let's ask the following question. What is the symbolism of a Brit Milah? What does a Brit Milah symbolize?
Covenant with Hashem.
Brit means covenant. So a Brit Milah symbolizes the eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people. Chaverot. If there was ever a time in Jewish history where it was difficult to see this eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people, that was in Auschwitz, it was in Chelmel. And if these women had turned around to Hashem and said, eternal covenant? Right, God, eternal covenant. You show us some sign of an eternal covenant and we'll follow with you. If they had said this, I think we would understand. We certainly wouldn't judge them because we don't have to judge anybody, not even Maya. But we would certainly understand it. But these women didn't say that. These women said, God, maybe we don't see a sign of this eternal covenant at this point in time, but we're not giving up on you. We're doing what we need to do in the hope that you will follow suit. And I don't really know where they got the spiritual strength and courage to be able to do this at that moment. But they did. Let's move on to something a little bit less radical. This picture was taken outside a bakery in Lodz. There were 13 bakeries in the Lodz ghetto. It's a picture taken outside the bakery. It comes from the Yad Vashem album on Lodz, but they don't say anything about it because they miss the most important thing in the picture. It's people lined up to get bread. That's what you would do at a bakery. You see they have stars on their back. So in Poland, you didn't have stars. In Poland, you had white armbands with blue stars in them, with a blue Magen David in them. that Lodz had been absorbed into Germany, and in Germany you had yellow stars. You have yellow stars on your back. Why on your back? Because Lodz was a working ghetto where everybody had to be hunched over their work, so you could identify a Jew with his yellow star on his back. Okay, you see a guy there with an armband, and you see him with an armband. He's a Jewish policeman who's there to maintain order. Now, if you have people here who are lining up to get bread, there's one image in the picture that doesn't fit in with that. And what is that image?
She has a pot.
A little girl with a pot. What you notice about the pot? Why would you cover a pot?
That's cholent inside. Is it like is it where they used to put
It's
cholent?
too quickly. Okay? You would cover a pot with something to keep stuff warm. Look at her face. How old is she? She's about 9, I would say, huh? Something like that. And she's got this look on her face as if to say, I did it. And she's coming out of the bakery with chocolate in a pot. My late mother told me she was the youngest in her family. And on Erev Shabbos, my grandmother would make chocolate. There was no slow cookers or what do you call them?
Crock pots.
Huh?
Crock pots.
Crock pots or any of these type of things, okay? You took the cholent, you took it to the local bakery. There was a fire on in the bakery the whole of Shabbos. And at some time before lunch on Shabbos morning, the youngest daughter, my mother, was sent to fetch the cholent. I mean, people are keeping the minhag of cholent in the Lodz ghetto. They say that the Lodz ghetto was the hungriest ghetto in the whole of Poland. Why? It didn't even have a wall around, it had a fence, because the dictator of the Lodz ghetto, this is a whole discussion in itself, a guy by the name of Chaim Mordechai Ramkovsky, okay, he made a deal with the Germans. We will work for you, you give us the food. And all the food came to him. It was his food. And he distributed the food by giving to his cronies and friends more. And if you weren't connected to Ramkovsky, you got very little food. People were starving. So think about it. You have very little food. You take your best food from the week. You make it into a cholent. And you put it there in a bakery, in a starving ghetto, where anybody can steal it by the next morning. It's lunacy. By the way, people were not keeping kosher anymore. Some people weren't, some people weren't. We got to that in a second. But even if you weren't keeping kosher, a family would get, where they would score, you know what score means? They would score a piece of horse meat polony, okay? And the father would say, oh, a shayla Michael, a delicious piece of food. Let's keep it for Shabbos. They weren't keeping kosher anymore. They weren't keeping Shabbos anymore. But the idea of keeping the best food for Shabbos was still there. The rabbis got involved in the story of cholent. The first letter we found is a typical rabbi letter. It says to the bakeries, you are closing the bakeries too close to Shkia. People are putting their cholent on the fire when it's already Shabbos. Because in Chilul Shabbos, please close the bakeries earlier. So you would expect rabbis to do this. The next letter, which I haven't got yet, the next letter says, hold on a second, we have a problem because some people are keeping kosher and some people are not keeping kosher anymore. You don't have a tray and a kosher cholent bubbling next to each other on the fire. So they said, okay, fine, of the 13 bakeries, there will be 7 kosher and 6 tray cholent bakeries. And if you want to take your cholent to a kosher cholent bakery, you have to get a letter from your local Orthodox rabbi to say, this isn't a ghetto where people are starving. It's ludicrous. And then eventually, the next letter, where's the next letter? Is this the next letter? Okay, if you look over here, it's all in Yiddish. You see those words? Can anybody read those words? Cholent, Geneva. What I worried about actually happened. The cholent got stolen. The little girl got to the bakery Shabbos morning and there's no cholent. So the rabbis instructed the bakeries that they had to insure the cholent. What do I mean by this? If it was a treif cholent, they had to give the family in replacement for the cholent a certain amount of horse meat polony, and if it was a kosher cholent, some margarine. Eventually, the rabbi said, no more cholent. They banned the custom of making cholent completely. Why? Because one of the difficult things in the ghetto was a lack of combustibles, a lack of stuff to make fire. So the fire in the bakery was burning lower and lower and lower. And the cholent would go bad. Now, if for your Shabbos lunch, you have chicken and schnitzel and cold cuts and cholent and brisket, and the cholent smells a bit iffy, you put the cholent to the side. But if all you have is the cholent, then the mother would probably take a smell of the cholent and say, it's okay. Well, these are mothers, okay? It's okay. And you eat the cholent, and when you're living on 180 calories a day, I didn't tell you this. In ghettos, they were living on 180 to 250 calories a day. How many calories do we need in order to just keep our body weight, not to get fat? About 2,200?
1,800 for women.
1,800 for women, 2,000, whatever. So you notice if you walked up, it was very deftly done. Okay, so whatever. So they were eating like a tenth of what you have to take in. Okay, when your body is suffering from such little nutrition and exposure and sickness, you can't afford to get food poisoning. So the rabbis eventually said no cholent. Let me ask you a question including this cholent section. Eating cholent on Shabbos is a mitzvah from the Torah or mitzvah from the rabbis? Sorry? It's neither. It's a minhag. It's a universal minhag. Okay? It's an important minhag because to show that we eat hot food on Shabbos and we're not carrots, we take literally the fact that it was written in last week's parsha that you shouldn't make hot food on Shabbos. Well, last week? I think so. Okay? That's it's an important minhag. We don't have cholent at home either. Because my wife doesn't like the smell of cholent. It makes her feel nauseous even when she's not pregnant, which is most of the time. Okay? So we have hot food, we don't necessarily have cholent. But it's a universal Jewish custom. So why don't they have cholent? Why would they risk their food to have cholent? And the survivors say, because they wanted the smell of Shabbos in the home. That smell of Shabbos in the home. That Shabbos should be a different day. When Abba would make kiddush on something. You know, there was one of the hostages who made kiddush on water. Okay? But Abba would make kiddush on something. He would tell stories of Eretz Israel and Maiselach that he had done in years before. So we don't have cholent, but we have chicken soup. Usually when my children come. Now, many years ago, my wife was ill for Shabbos, and I bought Shabbos, and then she said she really wants chicken soup. And I thought it's daft to buy chicken soup. I said, how do you make chicken soup? She told me. So a couple of weeks later, all our kids were there for Shabbos, and they said that my chicken soup tasted nicer than hers. So that was it. So I now make the chicken soup. Of course, a couple of weeks later, she says, do you want to know how to make chicken? And I said, no, thank you. Okay, but when the children come for Shabbos, they walk in the front door and they go, I miss chicken soup. It's Shabbos. And that's what they wanted to preserve. Let's move on. Pesach. So let me show you. I think this is Pesach. No? This is a letter that was put out in the Lord's ghetto again, stipulating which of the bakeries were going to be kasher to make matzah. Matzah was available. Look at this one. This is the instructions to the mashgichim. The previous letter said who was the mashgiach in each bakery, and these are the instructions that the rabbis are giving to the mashgichim in 1941 how to do things. Matzah was available. But the Jewish Council made the following calculation. Bread can be adulterated. You can add sawdust and any type of stuff to it. It doesn't give you nutrition, but it makes you feel full. But matzah can't be adulterated. Matzah is flour, water, and 18 minutes. That's it. That's the definition of matzah. Okay? So the Jewish Council said the following. If you insist on eating matzah on Pesach, we can provide you with matzah. This document over here is written, it comes from the Lublin area and shows how many thousands of kilos of matzah they had. We have matzah to give you. But because matzah is pure and the bread is adulterated, you have to take 1/3 less of your calorie intake. So if I'm taking in 2,400 calories a day and I reduce it to 1,600, I dare say that my wife would be delighted by the results. But if I'm taking in 240 calories a day and I reduce it to 160, that's absurd. And yet there were Jews who insisted only on eating matzah on Pesach. Now again, in the Lodge Ghetto, there were certain foods that they were now eating, which they'd never eaten before. So the rabbi said to Ankovsky, who's in charge of the Jewish council, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said about reducing the calories. Why would they reduce the calories? If they
Because it's
really
pure.
want to?
Because it's pure rather than the bread which can be adulterated.
Oh, okay.
In other words, the flour will be the same amount. I'm not sure if it was done. I'm not sure if it was done because they had to do it. It was done as a disincentive, or it was done as a punishment.
Okay.
Jewish councils in the ghettos are very complicated things. We know that Romkowski was complicit with the Germans. It's a very complicated subject in itself. But they were not necessarily always friendly to the people they were supposed to be looking after. Here, the rabbis asked the Jewish council in Lodz, can you please check the food laboratories outside the ghetto to make sure, there's a question? To make sure that all these ingredients are kosher Pesach. And here comes the response. You see, it says there, the Yudin, the elder of the Jews in the Lodz ghetto, and it says over here, we'd like to assure you that all the foodstuffs that you have given us have no sign of chometz. And I'm looking for a particular word here. Where is it? I never found it. Oh, look at the first word on the 1, 2, 3, 4, on the fifth line. Can you read the first word in the fifth line? The kitniot. You know what kitniot? Yes, but the Ashkenazim don't eat kitniot. Kitniot are any type of legumes. And there were rabbis many hundreds of years ago who decided that these type of legumes, which you can also theoretically make flour of, we can't eat on Pesach. Many people say that there is no rhyme or reason for it, but Ashkenazi Jews don't eat kitniot. Sephardi Jews eat kitniot, which is why they say slichot for a whole month, and we only say kitniot.
I said the same thing. Don't say that, Rabbi. Okay, we have a
It's
lot
true.
of time. I'll
It's
come
true.
to shower.
It's true. So here in the Lodz ghetto, they're starving, but they're eating matzah on Pesach, and they're not eating kitniot. That blows the mind. In the Kielce ghetto, there's no picture to go with this, but in the Kielce ghetto, the rabbi of the Kielce ghetto was very excited because he discovered outside the boundaries of the ghetto a derelict, unused matzah factory. It hadn't been used in years. He was very excited. On the one hand, because it was outside the ghetto, so it wasn't under the control of the Germans or of the Jewish council. He could basically do what he wanted. He got boys out there. He managed to get a source for matzah, for flour, and they get ready to make the matzah. But there's a problem. The ovens haven't been used in years. They're not working at the best. And this year, instead of it being 18-minute matzah, it's going to be 20-minute matzah. How do you measure the 18 minutes, by the way? From the moment that you mix the flour with the water, you can't have more than 18 minutes till you take the matzah out of the oven. So here, it wasn't baking in enough time. It would be 20-minute matzah. I know what I would have done. Like Tevier in the Fiddler on the Roof, I would say, God, over to you, my friend. I've done my best. I've got flour. I've got a matzah factory. I've got boys to go out there and make matzah. So this year it's going to be 20-year matzah, 20-minute matzah. God, you can cope with those 2 minutes or not, but I'm giving it over to you to cope with. This rabbi doesn't do that. He insists on these boys training again and again and again until they reduce the amount of time that it takes them from the moment they mix the water with the flour till it goes into the oven by 2 minutes, so it will still be 18-minute matzah. This is a sugar. And the last story about Pesach, which is a troubling story, and I'll tell you why in a moment. There were two rabbis who had survived the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. They were sent from place to place. They land up in Buchenwald, which is in Germany. It's before Pesach of 1945. It's just before the end of the war. The older of the two has let it be known that he's not going to eat chametz on Pesach. All they had to eat was bread. There was nothing else. So the younger goes to him and he says to him, Rabbi, he says to him, you must eat chametz this Pesach. Eat chametz this Pesach. The next Pesach, you'll keep Pesach properly. You could hear the American guns in the background. We're about to be liberated. It's almost over. What halacha is he referring to here? Pikuach nefesh. The basis of pikuach nefesh is you machalel this Shabbos, or so that either you or somebody else can keep next Shabbos. And this older rabbi says to him, do you really think that you have to tell me the halachot of pikuach nefesh? You think I don't know this? He said, but a Jew doesn't eat chametz on Pesach. And he ate chametz on Pesach, and he died days before the liberation. And many people listen to this and they say, what's the heroism here? They're basically behaving against the halakha. There are situations where the halakha says, contravene the halakha in order to live, because life is a value. And we have to explore that idea still, as to whether they're acting against the halakha or not. Let's move on and see if there's anything else on the shortening of time. In 1942, this is 42, the Lord Rabbis made a following announcement. No one, and especially sick and weak people, have to eat chametz on Pesach. A year before, they had bakeries and mashkichim, and they're finding out if stuff is kosher at Pesach, and they're getting ready for Pesach, like any Jewish community in the world, except they're a ghetto. A year later, sick people and weak people are not allowed to not eat chametz. Why? Because the Germans were weeding out weak people. And they took a responsibility for the welfare of people. We're not just keeping the halakha blindly or doing stuff blindly. We are responsible for the welfare of the people, and they came to the conclusions that Jews shouldn't eat sukkot. Here's a sukkah. This picture is taken in the large ghetto. Again, their homes could probably qualify as sukkot, but they're building a sukkah. You look at this picture, And I thought, in Chol HaMoed, I assumed it's a photo was taken. And got tefillin on, because Hasidim don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed, and the Ashkenazim do. Okay? They were keeping Chagim, huh?
It's only day you can go up to a Chabad guy and say, have you made tefillin today?
Yes. This is a letter written to Ramkovsky by random Jews in the Lord Ghetto, thanking him for managing to get hold of an etrog. I mean, people are starving to death. They still keeping this stuff. I want to show you one more thing. Let me just see. What is this? Okay. This is the last thing I want to show you, and then I want to tell you one other thing, and then we'll conclude. I found this letter, and I really miss you. The other topic I'm going to deal with in another lecture, the one that I just rushed through. Mit 2 Wochen zurück is gestorben a Sami Shmuel, a certain Shmuel. A guy called Shmuel, this letter says, died a couple of weeks ago. And he left, if you look at the second line, the fourth word from the end of the second line, a kinderloser almona Grindel. He left a childless widow called Grindel. And the letter continues to say that Shmuel has 3 brothers. What is the halakha that's connected with this? Yibum or chalitza. What is Yibum? Just as on regular chat. Okay, and don't throw things at me. Okay, but in biblical times or in ancient times, a woman didn't have independent status. A woman was either part of her father's house or part of her husband's house. And when she got married, she moved from her father's house to her husband's house, and it's usually a one-way movement. Okay, Father gets the money for her, but Amarno, and he washes his hands and washes any of it. Now he can fly things like that. Now, what happens if her husband dies? If her husband dies and they have children, her children, which are his parents' grandchildren, connect her still to her husband's house. But if she has no children, what connects her to her husband's house? So she's like not in her father's house, not in her husband's house. She's like all alone there, vulnerable. And the Torah is very, very, and it's a sickness. But the Torah is very, very conscious and sensitive to the vulnerability of women. I was in a restaurant. It was last year sometime. It's opposite Malcha in the building called Tamara. It's not just actually opposite Malcha. And I went to the bathroom. And after you get a key and you go into this place there, and there's the woman on one side and the men on the other side. And there's two young girls going in front of me. And I followed them into there because I wanted to go to the bathroom. And I caught the look in their eye for a split second as they appraised the degree of risk of me coming in there after. And I thought, for God's sake, why must the default be that women are vulnerable? Why must the default, you know what I'm trying to say? You understand this better than I do, okay? But it's a realism. So you have Yibum. So if this woman is like neither here nor there, the brothers have to take responsibility for her if she wants to. But because she's an independent human being, she has the right of refusal. So here, one of those three brothers has to either marry her or they have to do a ceremony called chalitza, which breaks the connection between her. It's called the zikah in halacha. It breaks the connection between her and the three brothers, and she's then free to marry anybody she wants. But if they don't do chalitza, she can't marry. She's a sort of an aguna. So you can say to yourself, come on, guys. What year is this? It's 1942. In the Lodz ghetto, people are being sent to Chelmno. They're soon going to be sent to Auschwitz. People are dying like flies from starvation. Why are we worried about this stuff? But the rabbis still want to protect her independence, to give her the right to remarry if she wants to remarry, to give her the right to not to be fettered by being an aguna. And look what they write in the letter. They say to Ramkovsky, it's written to Ramkovsky, I can't remember, understand it. It's written to Ramkovsky's committee because this is one of the horrible things about the Lodz ghetto, that the Jews were sending the Jews to their death. The Jewish council was making up a list of Jews to be sent to the death camps. So they write to Ramkovsky's office who's doing this, please will you spare one of the brothers just for 3 months, because you can't do chalitza until 3 months. Why 3 months? To make sure she's not pregnant. Any change in women's status, you wait 3 months to make sure that she's not pregnant from the previous state or from her previous status. Just let one brother be temporarily kept back for 3 months in order to give this woman the opportunity to do chalitza so she can be free to marry. Take it to myself. Two last things. I don't want you to think that all the stuff just revolves around mitzvahs and Shabbos and kashrut and all this type of stuff. So you remember last time I spoke about a Jew called Yaakov Krieger, the one who left the gold to his children to donate to the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi. So he arrives in Auschwitz, Birkenau actually. And he's in the quarantine block in Birkenau because the Germans were pathologically scared of illness. And they put people in the quarantine block to make 100% sure that they're not contagious. And they make an announcement in the quarantine block. We are looking for 300 slave laborers who have experience in working with metal to send to another labor camp. Now, Yaakov Krieger had been in another labor camp. He was a young boy, he grew up in Lodz, a Gera Chosid, and he'd been in a whole bunch of labor camps of various sizes before he arrives in Auschwitz. So Yaakov Krieger had a shrewd idea, he knew how to work with metal. And the Germans said, we know that everybody is just trying to get out of Auschwitz. Why? Because in Auschwitz, there was a continual backdrop to your life of this parade of people walking to the grass chambers, day and night. That was the backdrop of your life. And you knew that that's where your father, your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother, your wife, your children, your grandchildren had gone. And in order to live with that backdrop, you needed to be very, very strong emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. So if there was any opportunity to go somewhere else, people tried to. The Germans say, we know that you're going to try and get out of here. So we're going to test you to see if you really know, if you really had experience working with metal. And if you haven't, this is a bullet between the eyes. Yaakov has two friends, Chaim and Moshe. Yaakov had a shrewd idea how they would test them without any equipment. He tells his friends what the test is likely to be and how to pass the test. Yaakov Krieger passes the test. Moshe passes the test. Chaim doesn't. Chaverot, let's think about this. A normal human being under the circumstances would say, I'm out of here. A tzaddik tries to help his friends. So the one managed and the other one, what more can he do? So Yaakov Krieger says to Chaim, who failed the test, just step aside. Well, step aside. If somebody just like gets up and walks out, I'll probably give you a dirty look, but it's unlikely that I'll shoot you because I'm unarmed. Okay, but in a camp, you don't just walk aside. And I forgot to tell you, by the way, that on the head of each, on the forehead of each person who passed the test, they stamped a rubber stamped star. Not a Magen David, a star, like a cap. So Yaakov Krieger says to Chaim, spit on my forehead. Let's push our two foreheads together. So the imprint of the star moves from my forehead to your forehead. I believe people do that at discotheques, so they used to. I don't have much experience in that. He's crazy. Firstly, step aside, you can get killed for less. Secondly, the star on his forehead is now fainter. Thirdly, the star on Chaim's forehead is back to front. Fourthly, how many foreheads did the Germans put stars on? How many workers were they looking for? I told you, 300. And there are now 301. And the Germans go bazookies. They go absolutely crazy, counting and counting until one German officer says, you know what? What do we care? They're all going to die eventually anyhow. And they all get sent to the other labor camp. Avirot, in that moment, Yaakov Krieger saved his friend Chaim's life. Its conditions in the other labor camp were much better, were much easier. They were working indoors, they were sheltered from the weather, they had access to people who could give them extra food, and so on and so forth. He saved his life in that moment, there's no doubt about it. And just as a postscript, young German researchers who were looking through all the German documents from the Holocaust came up with a real puzzle. They said on a particular day, a random shipment of Jews was sent from Birkenau to a camp in Germany with 301 prisoners on it. And it's unclear why that random number. So you now know the backstory of that random number. It's amazing. I want to go back to one point and then conclude. We said that this behavior is not halachic behavior. Because according to the halacha, they should have ate treif, not keep on Shabbos, and survived. Eat chometz and survive. But I think it wasn't non-halachic behavior, it was something else. So I'll illustrate it with a story, as I do with everything. So there was an old Jew in the early days of the Warsaw Ghetto, and he's walking down one of the streets, and a German officer knocks him to the ground to knock his kippah off. The kippah falls on his ground, his glasses fall somewhere else. He looks for his glasses. The first thing he does is put his kippah back on his head. The German knocks him again. The kippah goes flying. He puts his kippah on. The German knocks him again. And his friend says to him, "You mad?" He says to him. "You don't have to die for wearing a kippah. Wearing a kippah isn't one of the Hareg Ya'avor, one of those 3 mitzvot that you'd rather allow yourself to be killed than contravening, which are adultery, idolatry, and murder. The kippah is a minhag. Universal minhag for men, but it's a minhag. Just leave the kippah off for a couple of minutes. The German officer will get bored, he'll move on, and everything will move along." And the old Jew said the following remark, which you need to listen to carefully. He said, "That Nazi officer can go to hell if he thinks he's going to affect my behavior as a Jew anyway." There was the sense we are not giving up on an iota of our being Jewish. Nothing. We are going to continue. And I don't call it a non-halachic position, I call it a super halachic position. It's not something that halakha demands of us. But somehow so many Jews during this period of time were able to find within themselves the strength to do stuff that just boggles the mind. And whenever I give the session, I get a little emotional, not really emotional, as you can see. And I'll tell you why. Because they weren't tzaddikim. They weren't born tzaddikim. These people, and there are another 20,000 stories that I could tell you. Oh, maybe. Good. Okay, but there's many stories that I can tell you of this. Authentic stories that come from people's memoirs, not Bobomaises. Authentic stories that come from people's memoirs. These Jews had the same DNA as we do. They had the same spiritual, physical, psychological, emotional, any other word, DNA that we have. And if they could find within themselves the strength to resist what they had to resist, there is absolutely nothing that can confront us in this world that we don't have the innate power to resist. And this is their message to us. And this is their legacy to us. They paid dearly for this legacy. But it is a very, very precious legacy that I encourage all of us, I'm talking to myself now, to take to heart. And I think that's enough for today. Okay? So, thank you for listening.